What happens when one of music's most beloved legends sits down for what should be a simple morning chat, only to find himself under attack from a host who seems determined to make headlines at his expense? In just 39 seconds, a single dismissive comment would transform a friendly interview into television chaos, exposing the true colors of a presenter who forgot that respect goes both ways. The morning started like any other on the set of Lorraine Kelly's daytime show. The studio lights gleamed, the audience settled into their seats, and Paul McCartney walked onto the stage to warm applause. He looked relaxed, dressed casually, but smartly, ready to discuss his latest project. What he did not know was that this would become one of the most uncomfortable moments of his decades-long career. Lorraine Kelly greeted him with her signature smile, but there was something different in her eyes, something sharp. The panel beside her consisted of three regular contributors: Marcus, an entertainment journalist known for his pointed questions; Sarah, a lifestyle commentator who rarely held back her opinions; and David, a music critic who had made a career out of controversial takes. "Paul McCartney, everyone," Lorraine announced as he took his seat. "The legend himself. Although, I have to say, I was surprised you agreed to come on. We are not exactly known for softball questions here." Paul smiled politely. "Well, I've been doing this a long time. I think I can handle whatever you throw at me." "Oh, we will see about that," Lorraine said, and the edge in her voice was unmistakable. "Let us start with the obvious. Your new album. Critics are calling it, well, let me just say, they are being kind when they use the word nostalgic." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This was not the warm welcome they had expected. Paul maintained his composure. "I think nostalgia can be a beautiful thing. Music is about emotion, about connecting with moments in time. Or maybe it is about an aging artist desperately clinging to past glory." Marcus jumped in from the panel. "I mean, let us be honest, Paul. When was the last time you did something truly relevant?" Sarah nodded in agreement. "The industry has moved on. Maybe it is time to accept that your moment is past." Paul's expression remained calm, but his eyes showed the hurt. "I create music because I love it, not because I am trying to prove something to critics." Lorraine leaned forward, her smile widening. "But surely you must feel it. The younger generation does not even know who you are. My daughter, she is 15, and when I told her you were coming on, she said, 'Paul, who?' Well, perhaps that says more about what you have exposed her to than anything else." Paul replied, his voice still measured. The audience gasped. It was a direct hit, and Lorraine did not like it. "Excuse me?" Lorraine's tone turned ice cold. "Are you suggesting I am a bad parent?" "Not at all," Paul said calmly. "I'm simply saying that every generation discovers music in their own way. I do not expect everyone to know my catalog, but I do think there is value in understanding musical history." David from the panel scoffed. "Musical history? Is that what we are calling it now? The Beatles broke up over 50 years ago. At what point does history become irrelevant?" "History is never irrelevant," Paul responded, his patience clearly wearing thin. "It is the foundation for everything that comes after." Lorraine was not done. "You know what I find fascinating, Paul? The ego. You sit here, on my show, and you act like you are doing us a favor, like we should be grateful that the great Paul McCartney graced us with his presence." "That is not fair," Paul said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "I came here to have a conversation, not to be attacked." "Attacked?" Sarah laughed from the panel. "Oh, please, if you cannot handle a few honest questions, maybe you should not be doing interviews." "Honest questions," Paul repeated. "You have not asked me a single honest question since I sat down. You have made assumptions, thrown insults, and tried to bait me into an argument." Lorraine rolled her eyes dramatically. "And there it is, the victim card. Classic move from someone who cannot handle criticism." Marcus chimed in again. "You know what your problem is, Paul? You have been famous for so long that you have forgotten what it is like to be challenged. Everyone treats you like royalty, and the moment someone pushes back, you crumble." "I am not crumbling," Paul said firmly. "I am simply asking for basic respect, the same respect I would give to anyone, regardless of whether I agreed with them or not." "Respect?" Lorraine said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You want respect? Maybe you should have thought about that before you walked onto my show with that holier-than-thou attitude." "What? Attitude?" Paul asked, genuinely confused. "I walked out here, I shook your hand, I sat down ready to talk. You are the one who started this with the jabs about my album before I even had a chance to speak." The audience was completely silent now, watching the exchange with wide eyes. This had gone far beyond uncomfortable television. This was personal. "Oh, so now I am the bad guy?" Lorraine said, looking to her panel for support. "Did you all hear that? I am the problem here." "Yes, actually," David said, surprisingly. "I mean, I am not saying I disagree with some of the criticism, but this has gotten pretty nasty, Lorraine." Lorraine spun to face David, fury in her eyes. "Whose side are you on?" "There should not be sides," Paul interjected. "This is supposed to be an interview, not a battle." "Everything is a battle when you are at the top," Lorraine shot back. "Or at least when you used to be at the top. Tell me, Paul, what does it feel like to be irrelevant? To know that your best work is behind you and that nobody under the age of 40 cares about what you do anymore?" Paul stood up slowly, his jaw tight. "You know what? I have been in this business for 60 years. I've been interviewed thousands of times. I've dealt with tough questions, skeptical journalists, and people who did not like my music. But I have never, and I mean never, been treated with such blatant disrespect." "Oh, sit down," Lorraine said dismissively, waving her hand. "Do not be so dramatic." "Dramatic?" Paul's voice was louder now, not shouting, but firm and clear. "You have spent the last 10 minutes trying to tear me down for absolutely no reason. You have questioned my relevance, insulted my work, and mocked the idea that I deserve any kind of respect. And when I call you out on it, I am being dramatic?" Sarah tried to step in. "Paul, I think what Lorraine is trying to say is—" "I know exactly what she is trying to say," Paul interrupted. "She is trying to create a moment. She wants me to lose my temper so she can have a viral clip. Well, I'm not going to give her that satisfaction." Lorraine stood up now too, facing Paul across the coffee table. "You think you are so much better than this show, do not you? You think you are above it all." "I think I deserve to be treated like a human being," Paul said quietly. "And clearly, that is too much to ask here." Marcus looked uncomfortable now. "Maybe we should all just take a breath and—" "No," Paul said, cutting him off. "I am done taking breaths. I am done trying to be polite while I am being insulted. Lorraine, I came here in good faith. I came here to talk about my music, to share stories, to connect with your audience. Instead, you have used this as an opportunity to boost your own ego by trying to take me down." "My ego?" Lorraine laughed bitterly. "That is rich coming from you. You have been coasting on the Beatles' reputation for decades." "The Beatles ended in 1970, Paul said, his voice steady. "Everything I have done since then, every album, every tour, every song, that has been on my own merit. I have never asked for special treatment. I have never demanded that people worship me, but I also will not sit here and let you treat me like I am worthless." The studio was dead silent. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. David spoke up quietly. "Lorraine, maybe he has a point." Lorraine whipped around to face her panel. "Not you too, David. I thought you of all people would understand what we are trying to do here." "What are we trying to do?" David asked. "Because from where I am sitting, it looks like we are just being cruel for the sake of being cruel." "We are being honest," Lorraine insisted. "We are not fawning over him like every other interviewer. We are asking the real questions." "No, you are not," Paul said. "You have not asked me about the creative process. You have not asked me about the musicians I worked with. You have not asked me about the message behind the songs. You have just attacked me personally and called it journalism." Sarah shifted in her seat. "To be fair, Paul, we did want to ask about your relevance in today's market." "Relevance?" Paul repeated. "Let me tell you something about relevance. Music is not a competition. It is not about who sells the most records this week or who has the most streams. It is about creating something that means something to people. And if my music means something to even one person, then it is relevant." "How poetic," Lorraine said mockingly. "Is that going to be a lyric in your next song?" Paul stared at her for a long moment. "You really do not get it, do you? You do not understand what it means to create something, to put your heart into your work, and then to have someone dismiss it without even trying to understand it." "Oh, I understand it," Lorraine said. "I understand that you are a relic from another era who cannot accept that the world has moved on without you." "The world has not moved on without me," Paul said calmly. "I still sell out stadiums. I still have fans all over the globe. The difference is that I do not need validation from someone like you." "Someone like me?" Lorraine's voice went up an octave. What is that supposed to mean? It means someone who tears others down to build themselves up, Paul said simply. Someone who has forgotten that kindness and respect are not weaknesses. Marcus tried again to diffuse the situation. Look, clearly there have been some misunderstandings here. Why do not we just start over and… There is nothing to start over, Paul said, already moving toward the edge of the stage. This interview is over. Lorraine laughed again, but it sounded forced. You cannot just walk off my show. Watch me, Paul said, removing the microphone from his lapel. You are making a huge mistake, Lorraine called after him. You walk off this set and you will never work in British television again. Paul paused and turned back to face her. Lorraine, I have performed for queens and presidents. I have played to millions of people. I have written songs that have touched generations. I do not need British television, but maybe British television needs to remember how to treat its guests with dignity. Sarah stood up. Paul, please, we can fix this. No, you cannot, Paul said, because the problem is not me. The problem is that you all thought it would be entertaining to ambush someone who came here in good faith. You thought tearing me down would make good television, and maybe it will. Maybe this will get millions of views online, but at what cost? David nodded slowly. He is right. This has gone too far. Lorraine pointed at David angrily. If you agree with him so much, maybe you should leave too. Maybe I should, David said, standing up as well. The audience began to murmur. This was unprecedented. Sit down, David, Lorraine commanded. You are under contract. I do not care, David said. I am not going to be part of this anymore. Marcus remained seated, but looked deeply uncomfortable. Lorraine, I think we need to end this segment. We will end it when I say we end it, Lorraine snapped. She turned back to Paul, who was now standing near the studio exit. Fine, go, run away. Prove that you cannot handle real conversation. This was not a conversation, Paul said softly. This was an ambush. There is a difference. He walked toward the door, and David followed him. The studio audience sat in shocked silence, unsure whether to applaud or stay quiet. Lorraine called out one more time. You are going to regret this, Paul. You have just made a very powerful enemy. Paul stopped at the door and looked back one final time. No, Lorraine, you made an enemy out of yourself. I just refuse to be your victim. And with that, he walked out, David right behind him. The heavy studio door closed with a definitive thud that echoed through the silent space. Sarah looked at Lorraine. What just happened? Lorraine stood in the middle of the stage, her face red with anger and embarrassment. What happened is that a washed-up musician could not handle a little heat. Marcus shook his head. Lorraine, that was not heat. That was cruelty. There is a difference. Oh, not you too, Lorraine said, exasperated. The studio director's voice came through the speakers. We are cutting to commercial. Lorraine, we need to talk. Lorraine ripped off her microphone. Talk about what? I did my job. I asked hard questions. You attacked a guest? Marcus said quietly. A guest who has never done anything to you. He was arrogant, Lorraine insisted. No, Sarah said slowly. He was not. He was just confident. And maybe we mistook that. Confidence for arrogance, because we wanted a reason to go after him. Lorraine looked around at her panel, at the audience, at the cameras that were still rolling despite the commercial break. Everyone was looking at her with disappointment, with confusion, with something that looked like pity. You are all overreacting, she said weakly. But even she did not sound convinced anymore. In the green room, Paul sat down heavily, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. David sat beside him, equally shaken. I am sorry you had to see that, Paul said quietly. I am sorry I was part of it, David replied. I knew it was getting ugly, but I did not speak up soon enough. You spoke up when it mattered, Paul said. That took courage. A production assistant knocked timidly on the door. Mr. McCartney? The producers wanted me to ask if you would consider coming back to finish the interview. Paul looked at her with tired eyes. Tell them thank you. But no, I think we have all said enough for one day. The assistant nodded and left. David leaned back in his chair. You know what the crazy thing is? I've been watching Lorraine's show for years, and I've never seen her like that. It was like she decided before you even walked out that she was going to make you look bad. Some people feel threatened by success, Paul said, even success that has nothing to do with them. But why? David asked. You are a legend. You have nothing to prove. Why would she feel threatened by you? Paul smiled sadly. Because maybe that is exactly why. Because I do not need her show. Because I was doing her a favor by appearing, and she knew it, and that made her feel small, so she tried to make me feel small too. Well, she failed, David said firmly. You handled that with more grace than most people could have managed. Back in the studio, Lorraine was in a heated discussion with her producers. The audience had been dismissed, but the tension lingered in the air like smoke. Marcus approached her cautiously. Lorraine, we have been friends for a long time, so I am going to be honest with you. That was not okay. I do not want to hear it, Lorraine said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. You need to hear it, Marcus pressed, because everyone watching at home is going to see what we all just saw. A host who forgot that her job is to make guests feel welcome, not to tear them apart. Since when is asking tough questions tearing someone apart? Lorraine demanded. Since the questions stopped being about the work and started being personal attacks, Sarah said, joining them. You questioned his relevance, his parenting indirectly, his entire career. Those were not tough questions. Those were insults. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he was condescending to me. Was he? Marcus asked. Or did you interpret his confidence as condescension because you wanted a reason to justify what you had already decided to do? Lorraine did not answer. Sarah spoke gently. Lorraine, you are a good interviewer. I have seen you be warm and insightful and genuinely curious about your guests. What happened today? Why did you come at him so hard? Lorraine sat down in her chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I do not know. I just felt like he was not taking us seriously, like we were beneath him. But he never said that, Marcus pointed out. He never acted that way. You just assumed it. Maybe, Lorraine admitted quietly. The studio fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Not the shocked silence of watching a disaster unfold, but the uncomfortable silence of forced self-reflection. One of the producers walked over. We are getting calls already. People want to know what happened, why Paul left. What are you going to tell them? Lorraine asked. The producer looked at her seriously. The truth, that there was a disagreement, and the interview ended early. But Lorraine, you need to think carefully about what you want to say publicly about this. Because the way you handle this next part matters. Marcus nodded. He is right. You can either own up to it and apologize, or you can double down and try to paint Paul as the villain. But I am telling you right now, if you choose the second option, nobody is going to believe you. Why not? Lorraine asked, though she already knew the answer. Because he is Paul McCartney, Sarah said simply. Because everyone who watched that is going to side with him. Because you went too far, and deep down, you know it. Lorraine put her head in her hands. This is a disaster. It does not have to be, the producer said, but you need to make a choice, and you need to make it now. Meanwhile, back in the green room, Paul was gathering his things. His manager had arrived, concerned and confused about what had transpired. Do you want to make a statement? The manager asked. Paul shook his head. No, let it speak for itself. The people who are watching know what happened. I do not need to explain it. But Lorraine might try to spin this, the manager warned. Let her try, Paul said calmly. The truth does not need spinning. David stood up. Paul, for what it is worth, I am going to write about this. Honestly, about what really happened in there. Paul extended his hand. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. They shook hands, and Paul headed for the exit. As he walked through the corridors of the television studio, staff members stopped and stared. Some looked sympathetic. Some looked shocked. None of them said anything. When Paul finally stepped outside into the daylight, he took a deep breath. The air felt cleaner out here, away from the artificial lights and the manufactured drama. His driver was waiting. Rough morning, sir? Paul smiled slightly. You could say that. Where to? Home, Paul said. Definitely home. As the car pulled away from the studio, Paul looked back at the building one last time. He did not feel angry anymore. He felt something closer to sadness. Sadness that a simple interview had turned into something so ugly. Sadness that people felt the need to build themselves up by tearing others down. But mostly, he felt relief. Relief that he had stood up for himself. Relief that he had not compromised his dignity for the sake of good television. Relief that he knew his worth, even when others tried to make him doubt it. Back inside the studio, Lorraine sat alone in the empty space. The lights were dim now, the cameras powered down. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, hearing her own words echo back at her. You have been famous for so long that you have forgotten what it is like to be challenged. Maybe you should have thought about that before you walked onto my show with that holier-than-thou attitude. What does it feel like to be irrelevant? Each quote made her wince. Had she really said those things? Had she really been that harsh? Yes, she had. And now she had to live with it. Sarah poked her head back into the studio. Lorraine? The producers want to see you. Lorraine stood up slowly. I know. Are you going to apologize? Sarah asked. Lorraine paused. I do not know yet. You should, Sarah said softly. Not because you have to, but because it is the right thing to do. Lorraine nodded slowly. Maybe you are right. As she walked toward the producer's office, her mind was racing. She could double down, insist that Paul had been difficult, that he could not handle tough questions. She could try to paint herself as the victim, the brave interviewer who dared to challenge a legend. Or she could tell the truth. She reached the door and paused, her hand on the handle. Inside that room, decisions would be made. Statements would be crafted. The narrative would be set, and she alone had the power to decide what that narrative would be. But Paul McCartney was already home, the interview behind him, the drama fading into memory. He had his dignity, he had his truth, and he had walked away from something that did not serve him. Sometimes that is the strongest thing a person can do, to know when to stay and when to walk away, to recognize when a situation has become toxic and to remove yourself from it, regardless of what others might think. Paul had done that. He had drawn a line and refused to let anyone cross it. And in that moment, standing up and walking out of that studio, he had proven that legends are not made just by the music they create or the stages they command. They are made by how they carry themselves when tested, by the grace they show under pressure, by the refusal to be diminished by people who feel small. Lorraine had tried to make him feel irrelevant, washed up, past his prime, but all she had really done was expose her own insecurities, her own need to feel powerful by making someone else feel weak. Paul had not given her that power. He had simply stood up, stated his truth, and walked away. And that, more than any song or any performance, was the mark of true dignity.